The rifle felt heavier than usual in Marcus Brennan's calloused hands as he tracked through the Montana wilderness, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter February air. He'd been hunting men for money for 15 years, but this contract was different. The target wasn't some outlaw or cattle rustler, it was a woman. A pregnant woman, according to the file tucked inside his coat pocket. The bounty was substantial enough to keep him comfortable for 2 years, but something about this job gnawed at his conscience like a splinter under skin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Marcus didn't know was that in a matter of hours, everything he believed about right and wrong would crumble like ice under spring sun. And the woman he was paid to kill would become the very person he'd risk everything to protect. The telegram had arrived on a Tuesday morning at the Copper Creek Saloon, delivered by a nervous boy who couldn't have been more than 14. Marcus had been nursing his second whiskey of the day when the bartender, Old Pete, slid the yellow paper across the scarred wooden bar. "Ryder says this is for you, Marcus." Came all the way from Denver. Marcus unfolded the telegram with fingers that had learned to be steady even when his heart wasn't. The message was brief, professional, and paid in advance, his preferred type of work. A woman named Sarah Elizabeth Hartwell had stolen something valuable from a wealthy Denver businessman named Theodore Ashford. The item wasn't specified, but the bounty was $500. Dead or alive, though the preference was clearly dead given the amount. What made Marcus pause wasn't the money or even the gender of the target. It was the additional detail scrawled at the bottom. Subject is approximately 7 months pregnant. Exercise discretion. He'd folded the telegram and tucked it away, but the words had burned themselves into his memory. In his 15 years as a bounty hunter, he'd never been asked to kill a pregnant woman. Men who cheated at cards, rustled cattle, or robbed banks, that was one thing. But this felt different, wrong in a way that made his stomach turn. Still, $500 was $500, and winter had been hard. His cabin needed repairs, his horse needed proper feed, and he had debts in 3 different towns. Marcus had learned long ago that survival meant setting aside squeamishness for practicality. The trail had led him north from Denver, through the Colorado Rockies, and into the wild expanse of Montana territory. Sarah Hartwell had been smart, covering her tracks well, but Marcus had been hunting people longer than she'd been running. He'd picked up her trail at a trading post near the Wyoming border, where a pregnant woman matching her description had traded a gold locket for supplies and a worn coat. The locket detail had stuck with him. What kind of woman trades away gold jewelry unless she's desperate? And what had she supposedly stolen that was worth $500 to see her dead? Marcus had pushed these questions aside and continued tracking. The trail led through increasingly remote terrain, past abandoned mining camps and through forests where the snow lay 3 feet deep. His target was moving slowly, likely due to her condition, but she was also moving smartly, avoiding main roads and settlements where she might be remembered. 3 days into the hunt, Marcus found her temporary camp in a grove of pines. The ashes were cold, but the shelter shed built showed skill and desperation in equal measure. Branches had been woven together to create a windbreak, and she dug down to bare earth to build her fire pit. This wasn't the work of some pampered city woman. This was someone who knew how to survive. More troubling were the signs he found around the camp. Bloodstains on the snow, not from an injury, but from something else. Something that made Marcus's experienced eye narrow with concern. The woman was in more trouble than just being hunted. He'd pushed harder after that, following her trail up into the high country where the air grew thin and the cold bit through even his thick coat. The snow had been falling steadily for 2 days, making tracking difficult, but Marcus had learned to read sign and conditions that would stymie lesser hunters. On the 4th day, he'd found where she'd sheltered in a cave overnight. The signs were fresher here. She was maybe 6 hours ahead of him now. But there were other signs too, disturbing ones. The snow around the cave entrance was trampled and stained, and inside he'd found strips of fabric that looked like they'd been torn from a dress or undergarment. Marcus had stood in that cave for a long time, staring at the evidence and trying to ignore the growing certainty in his gut. The woman wasn't just pregnant, she was in labor. Or had been. And she was alone in the middle of nowhere, in weather that could kill even experienced OUTDOORSMEN. That the practical part of his mind said this made his job easier. If she was giving birth in the wilderness, nature might do his work for him. He could simply wait, collect the body, and claim his bounty. But another part of him, a part he'd thought he'd killed years ago, rebelled against the idea. He'd left the cave and continued following her trail, but with less enthusiasm than before. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind was picking up. Even his hardy mountain horse was struggling through the deepening drifts. Whatever had driven Sarah Hartwell to flee into this wilderness, it must have been worse than the prospect of dying alone in the snow. The trail led higher into the mountains, following what might have been an old mining road decades ago, but was now just a barely visible trace through the trees. Marcus had hunted through these mountains before, and he knew there was nothing up here but abandoned claims and the occasional trapper's cabin. If the woman was looking for help, she was heading in the wrong direction. As the afternoon wore on, the storm intensified. The snow was coming down so thick that Marcus could barely see his horse's ears, and the wind was whipping it into horizontal sheets that stung his face like needles. He was beginning to worry about his own survival, let alone completing his contract. That's when he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. A woman's cry of pain, raw and desperate. Marcus pulled his horse to a stop and listened. The wind died for a moment, and he heard it again. Not just pain, but the specific kind of pain he'd heard before, when his sister had given birth to her first child. The sound of a woman in labor, pushing a new life into the world. He followed the sound through the trees, his horse picking its way carefully through the snow. The cries were getting louder, more frequent, and Marcus found himself urging his mount forward despite every instinct telling him to turn back. He found her in a clearing beside a half-collapsed miner's shack, the roof caved in but the walls still standing. She was lying in the snow, her back against the wooden wall, and even from a distance Marcus could see the dark stains spreading beneath her. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair matted with sweat and snow, and her face was contorted with pain. Sarah Hartwell, for this had to be her, was giving birth alone in a blizzard, and from the look of things, she was in serious trouble. Marcus sat on his horse for a long moment, his rifle across his saddle, watching the woman who was supposed to be his prey. She hadn't seen him yet, too focused on her own struggle to notice the mounted figure at the edge of the clearing. He could end this now, quickly and cleanly, and be back in Denver within the week to collect his money. But as he watched, she turned her head and saw him. Their eyes met across the snow-filled clearing, and Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, though that was there too, but relief. Pure, desperate relief at seeing another human being in her moment of greatest need. "Please," she called out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Please help me." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, like ice cracking on a frozen river. He'd been paid to kill this woman, but looking at her now vulnerable, in pain, bringing life into the world in the middle of nowhere, he knew he couldn't do it. Not like this. Maybe not at all. He dismounted slowly, keeping his rifle lowered, and approached the shack. The woman watched him with wide, frightened eyes, but she didn't try to run. She couldn't run, not in her condition. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice rough from the cold and something else. "Looks like you could use some help." Sarah Hartwell nodded, tears streaming down her face. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong. I don't know what to do." Marcus knelt beside her, his practiced eyes taking in the situation. He'd helped birth foals and calves, but this was different. This was a human life, 2 human lives, hanging in the balance. And despite the contract in his pocket, despite the money waiting for him in Denver, he knew he was going to do everything in his power to save them both. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been sent to deliver death, but instead found himself about to deliver life. And in that moment, with the snow falling around them and the woman's cries echoing off the mountains, Marcus Brennan made a choice that would change everything. He set his rifle aside and reached for his saddlebags. "What's he?" "Your name, ma'am?" "Sarah," she whispered between contractions. "Sarah Hartwell." "Well, Sarah Hartwell," Marcus said, pulling out clean cloth and the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. "I'm Marcus Brennan, and I'm going to help you bring this baby into the world." What he didn't tell her was that he'd been sent to kill her. That knowledge would have to wait for another day, another conversation, when both she and her child were safe. For now, all that mattered was the life struggling to be born in the middle of a Montana blizzard, and the strange twist of fate that had brought a killer and his prey together in the most unlikely of circumstances. The storm raged on around them. But in that moment, death seemed very far away indeed. Marcus had delivered enough animals to know when things weren't going right, and everything about Sarah's labor screamed danger. Her face was pale as the snow around them, and the blood beneath her was dark, too dark. He'd seen Mares die from complications just like this. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "We need to get you somewhere warmer. Can you move?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She shook her head weakly. "I tried to reach the cabin, but the contractions..." Another wave of pain cut off her words, and she gripped his arm with surprising strength. Marcus looked at the collapsed miner's shack. The roof was gone, but 3 walls still stood, and that was better than nothing. He made a quick decision. "I'm going to move you inside. It's going to hurt, but we don't have a choice." He lifted her as gently as he could, surprised by how light she was. Pregnant women were supposed to be heavy, but Sarah felt like she was made of bird bones. When had she last eaten a proper meal? The thought bothered him more than it should have. Inside the shack, Marcus quickly cleared debris from the corner. That offered the most protection from the wind. He spread his bedroll on the ground and eased Sarah onto it, then draped his heavy coat over her shoulders. "The baby's coming," she gasped. "I can feel it." Marcus pulled his saddle inside and positioned it to block some of the wind. His horse whinnied nervously outside, but the animal was hardy enough to weather the storm. Right now, Sarah needed his attention more than his mount. "Tell me what happened," he said, partly to keep her talking and partly because he needed to understand what he'd gotten himself into. "How did you end up out here?" Sarah's eyes darted to his face, searching for something. "Trust, maybe, or judgment. You don't know who I am?" "I know your name. That's about all." The lie came easily, but it felt wrong on his tongue. "Theodore Ashford," she whispered. "In Denver. He was my employer." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Theodore Ashford was the man who'd hired him to kill her. "What kind of employer?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "The kind who thinks he owns everything he pays for, including the women who work in his house." The pieces started falling into place. Ashford was known around Denver as a businessman with flexible morals, but Marcus had never heard specifics. Now he was beginning to understand why a pregnant woman would flee into the wilderness rather than face whatever waited for her back. "In the city, he's the father?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah nodded, then cried out as another contraction hit. This one was stronger, longer, and Marcus could see the baby's head beginning to crown. "Okay, Sarah, this is it. The baby's coming now." I need you to push what I tell you. I don't know how, she sobbed. I've never. This is my first. Listen to your body. It knows what to do. Marcus positioned himself to catch the baby, his hands shaking slightly. He'd pulled plenty of calves, but this felt monumentally different. The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of snow, blood, and Sarah's cries. Marcus found himself coaching her through each contraction, his voice steady and encouraging despite his own fear. He'd never been responsible for a human life like this, let alone two. When the baby finally slipped into his hands, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. The tiny girl, for it was clearly a girl, was blue and still, covered in blood. And not breathing. His heart stopped. Is she? Sarah raised herself on her elbows, terror in her eyes. Marcus cleared the baby's mouth and nose with his finger, then turned her over and patted her back firmly. Nothing. He tried again, harder. This time, and suddenly the baby let out a thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. She's perfect, he said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't expect. You have a daughter, Sarah. He wrapped the baby in the cleanest cloth he had and placed her on Sarah's chest. The new mother's face transformed, exhaustion replaced by wonder as she looked at her child. Hello, little one, she whispered. I'm your mama. Marcus busied himself with the afterbirth and cleaning up, giving Sarah privacy for her first moments with her daughter. But his mind was racing. The baby was healthy, but Sarah had lost too much blood. She needed medical attention, and they were miles from the nearest town. What's her name? He asked. Grace, Sarah said without hesitation. Grace Elizabeth. That's a fine name. Marcus tied off the umbilical cord and cut it with his knife. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. What did you take from Ashford? Sarah's face closed off, and she held Grace closer to her chest. Why do you want to know? Because I think he's going to keep looking for you. And if I'm going to help you, I need to know what we're dealing with. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. You're not one of his men? No, I'm just someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. Another lie, but a necessary one. I didn't steal anything, Sarah said finally. I was his housekeeper for 2 years. He forced himself on me. When I realized I was pregnant, I told him. He said he'd take care of it, but not the way I hoped. He wanted me to get rid of the baby. When I refused, he said he'd do it himself. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest. He'd killed men for less than what Ashford had done to Sarah, so you ran. I took some of his wife's jewelry, just enough to get me started somewhere new. I thought I could make it to Oregon, maybe California, find work, raise my daughter. Sarah's voice broke. I never meant for it to end like this. It's not ending, Marcus said firmly. The storm's getting worse, but I've got supplies. We can wait it out here. And then what? He'll never stop looking for me. He can't afford to let word get out about what he did. Marcus stood and walked to the doorway, looking out at the swirling snow. His horse was barely visible, a dark shape against the white. The storm was indeed getting worse, but that wasn't what worried him. It was the other problem, the contract in his pocket, the money waiting for him in Denver, and the growing certainty that he was never going to be able to complete this job. There's something I need to tell you, he said, turning back to Sarah, but she had fallen asleep, exhausted from the birth and blood loss. Grace was sleeping too, nestled against her mother's chest. For a moment, Marcus just watched them, this woman and child who were supposed to be his prey, but had somehow become his responsibility. He pulled his extra blanket from his saddlebags and covered them both, then built up the fire he'd started in the corner of the shack. The smoke would escape through the missing roof, and the flames would provide some warmth. Not enough, but better than nothing. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about his sister back in Kansas. Mary had died in childbirth 3 years ago, along with her baby. The local doctor had been drunk, and there'd been no one else to help. Marcus had held her hand as she died, promising to take care of her husband and other children. It was a promise he'd kept, sending money when he could. But it was never enough. Now here he was, watching another woman and her newborn child. And all he could think about was Mary's last words. Promise me you'll try to be better than what you are, Marcus. Promise me you'll do something good with your life. He'd made that promise, then promptly gone back to hunting men for money. But maybe this was his chance to keep it, really keep it. The storm raged outside, and Marcus settled in to keep watch. Every so often, he'd check on Sarah and Grace, making sure they were breathing, that they were warm enough. Sarah's color was slowly improving, and Grace seemed to be thriving despite the circumstances. Around midnight, Sarah woke up with a start. Grace, she's fine. Both of you are fine. Marcus moved closer, keeping his voice low. How are you feeling? Like I was trampled by a horse. Sarah winced as she shifted position. But alive, thanks to you. Don't thank me yet. We're still stuck in the middle of nowhere in a blizzard. Sarah looked around the shack, taking in their situation. You could have kept writing, left us here. Why didn't you? Marcus stared into the fire, unsure how to answer. I had a sister. She died giving birth. I couldn't help her, but maybe I could help you. I'm sorry about your sister. Her name was Mary. She was the best person I knew. Marcus glanced at Sarah. She would have liked you, I think. She always said there was good in everyone, even people who'd lost their way. Have you lost your way? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus thought about the telegram in his pocket, about the money waiting for him in Denver, about the life he'd built hunting other people's problems for profit. Yeah, he said finally. I think I have. Sarah nodded as if she understood. Theodore Ashford is a powerful man. He has connections, money, and influence. If he wants me dead, he'll find a way. Not if I have anything to say about it. The words surprised Marcus even as he said them. He'd made a decision without realizing it, crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He was no longer just helping Sarah. And Grace survived the storm. He was taking sides in a war he'd been hired to fight on the opposite side. Why? Sarah asked. You don't even know me. Marcus looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. Because some things are more important than money. Took me a long time to remember that. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and the snow continued to fall. But inside the ruined shack, something was being born that had nothing to do with the baby girl sleeping between them. Marcus Brennan, bounty hunter and killer, was becoming something else entirely, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The storm would pass eventually, and when it did, they'd have to face the world outside. But for now, at this moment, they were safe. An unlikely family brought together by circumstance, united by necessity, and bound by something stronger than either of them fully understood. Marcus fed the fire and settled back against the wall, his rifle across his knees, not to use against Sarah and Grace, but to protect them from whatever came next. He'd been sent to deliver death, but had chosen to defend life instead. That it was a choice that would define everything that followed. Dawn came gray and muted, the storm finally beginning to weaken after raging through the night. Marcus had dozed fitfully, startling awake every time Grace made a sound or Sarah shifted in her sleep. His back ached from sitting against the wooden wall, and his coffee had run out hours ago. But both mother and daughter were alive and breathing steadily. Sarah woke first, her eyes immediately going to Grace before scanning the shack. The storm? Passing. Marcus stood and stretched, his joints protesting. We should be able to move today, but not far. You need rest, and the baby needs warmth. Where can we go? There's nothing out here but wilderness. Marcus had been thinking about that all night. There's a trapper's cabin about 5 miles south, Fellow named Jakob Henriksen. He's Norwegian, keeps to himself, but he's decent enough. He'll help us. What he didn't mention was that Jakob owed him a favor. 2 years ago, Marcus had chosen not to turn him in when he'd found the trapper selling furs without proper permits. Sometimes mercy paid unexpected dividends. Sarah struggled to sit up, wincing with pain. I can't ride. Not yet. I know. I'll rig up a travois. My horse can pull you and Grace. As Marcus worked outside, fashioning a crude sled from branches and rope, he found himself thinking about the telegram hidden in his saddlebags. Theodore Ashford expected results, and when he didn't get them, he'd send someone else. Someone who might not be swayed by a newborn's cries or a mother's desperation. The thought of another bounty, Hunter finding Sarah and Grace, made his blood run cold. He'd have to send word to Denver, somehow convince Ashford that Sarah had died in the storm. But that would only work if no one ever saw her again. Marcus? Sarah's voice called from inside the shack. Something's wrong with Grace. He dropped his work and rushed inside. Sarah was holding the baby, her face pale with worry. Grace was making strange sounds, little gasping noises that didn't sound right. She's cold, Sarah said. Too cold. And she won't nurse properly. Marcus knelt beside them, his limited knowledge of newborns suddenly feeling woefully inadequate. The baby's lips had a bluish tint, and her skin felt cool to the touch despite being wrapped in blankets. We need to get her warm now. He scooped up both mother and child, carrying them closer to the fire. Take off your dress. What? Skin-to-skin contact. It's how you keep newborns warm. I've seen it done with animals. Sarah's face flushed, but she understood the urgency. She opened her dress and placed Grace against her bare chest, then wrapped Marcus's coat around both of them. Within minutes, the baby's color began to improve. Better, Marcus said, relief flooding through him. But we need to get to Jakob's cabin today. The journey south took most of the morning. Marcus had rigged the travois as comfortably as possible, but Sarah gritted her teeth with every bump and jolt. Grace remained pressed against her mother's chest, wrapped in every blanket and piece of clothing they could spare. Jakob's cabin appeared through the trees like a mirage, smoke rising from its chimney in a welcoming gray column. The Norwegian trapper emerged as they approached, his weathered face creased with concern. Brennan? What brings you to my... He stopped mid-sentence as he saw Sarah and the baby. Ah, I see. Come inside, quickly. Jakob's cabin was small but warm, with a proper stove and actual furniture. More importantly, it was clean and dry. The trapper helped Marcus carry Sarah inside, then immediately began stoking the fire. New baby? Jakob asked in his accented English. Born in the storm? Yesterday, Marcus replied. They need rest, warmth, proper food. Yeah, of course. I have soup, bread. And my Emma, she had babies. I know what is needed. Jakob's wife Emma had died 5 years ago, but he'd kept her things, including baby clothes and supplies. Within an hour, Sarah was in a proper bed, Grace was wrapped in soft wool blankets, and both were being fed warm soup. She will be fine, Jakob assured Marcus as they stood outside the cabin. The baby too, strong little one. But you, my friend, you look troubled. Marcus stared at the snow-covered mountains. Jakob, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not ask questions. Yeah? If someone comes looking for them, for Sarah and the baby, you never saw them. They were never here. Can you do that? Jakob's pale blue eyes studied Marcus's face. Someone is hunting them? Yes. Bad men? Very bad. Jakob nodded slowly. Then they were never here. But Marcus, what about you? You are involved in this, yeah? Is dangerous for you too. Marcus pulled the telegram from his pocket and handed it to Jakob. The Norwegian read it, his expression growing darker with each word. Mein Gott, Jakob whispered. You were sent to kill her? I was, But I can't, I won't. This Ashford, he will send others when you do not return. I know. That's why I need you to help me with something else. Marcus outlined his plan. It was desperate, risky, and probably wouldn't work, but it was the only chance they had. Jakob listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question. It could work, the trapper said finally. But you will need help, cannot do this alone. I know someone in Billings. Tom Crawford. He's a sheriff, but he's honest. He'll help if I ask. And after? When is it done? What happens to the woman? And child? Marcus looked back at the cabin, where Sarah was probably sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. I don't know, but they'll be alive, and that's what matters. Jakob clapped him on the shoulder. You are a good man, Marcus. Brennan, took you a long time to remember, but you are a good man. That afternoon, while Sarah rested, Marcus sat by the fire writing letters. The first was to Tom Crawford in Billings, explaining the situation and asking for help. The second was harder a report to Theodore Ashford, claiming that Sarah Hartwell had died in the blizzard, along with her unborn child. The body had been lost to wolves, the report claimed, but Marcus had recovered some of Mrs. Ashford's jewelry as proof. It was a lie that could get him killed if discovered, but it was the only way to buy them time. What are you writing? Sarah asked, emerging from the bedroom with Grace in her arms. Letters, business. Marcus folded the papers and tucked them away. How are you feeling? Better. Still weak, but better. Sarah sat beside him, adjusting Grace's blanket. Jakob told me what you're doing, the risk you're taking. Jakob talks. Too much. He said you were hired to kill me. Marcus went very still. Sarah, is it true? There was no point in lying anymore. Yes. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Grace. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Why? Marcus stared into the fire, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. Because the moment I saw you, fighting to bring life into the world, I knew I couldn't take life away. Because my sister died in childbirth, and I couldn't save her, but maybe I could save you. Because some things are more important than money. And because you're a better man than you think you are, Sarah said quietly. I've done terrible things, Sarah. Killed men for money. I'm not good. Good men don't usually think they're good. It's the bad ones who are certain of their virtue. Sarah shifted Grace to her other arm. What happens now? Now we disappear. You, me, Grace. We go somewhere Ashford can't find us. We? Marcus looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger 3 days ago and who now felt like family. If you'll have me. I know I'm not much, but I can protect you. Both of you. Sarah studied his face. What about your life? Your work? My life was empty. And my work was bringing death to the world. Maybe it's time I tried bringing something else instead. That evening, as snow began to fall again outside Jakob's cabin, Marcus found himself helping Sarah feed Grace. The baby was thriving now. Warm and well-fed, her tiny fist wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. She likes you, Sarah observed. She's just hungry. No, she really likes you. Look at how she watches your face. Marcus did look and felt something twist in his chest. Grace's dark eyes were fixed on his face with what almost looked like recognition. It was impossible. Of course, newborns couldn't see clearly, but the feeling was there nonetheless. I never thought I'd have children, he said quietly. Why? Not? Men like me don't usually live long enough. And even if we do, we don't make good fathers. What makes a good father? Marcus thought about his own father, a hard man who died when Marcus was 12. Being there, I guess. Keeping them safe. Teaching them right from wrong. You saved our lives. You're keeping us safe. And you chose to do the right thing, even when it cost you everything. Sounds like good father material to me. The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He'd never allowed himself to imagine a different life, a family, a future beyond the next bounty. But sitting here with Sarah and Grace, he could almost see it: a small house somewhere far from Colorado, maybe a garden, definitely a dog for Grace to play with when she was older. "It's a nice dream," he said. "It doesn't have to be just a dream." Later that night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Marcus sat with Jakob by the fire, sharing a bottle of whiskey the trapper had been saving for a special occasion. "You love her," Jakob said. "It wasn't a question. I barely know her." "Yeah, but you love her, and the baby. I see it in your eyes." Marcus took a sip of whiskey, letting it burn away the words he couldn't say. "It doesn't matter. Love doesn't change what I am." "What?" "You were," Jakob corrected. "Not what you are. Man can change, Marcus. I was a soldier once, killed many men in the war. Now I trap animals, live quietly, hurt no one. People change. Some people. All people. If they want badly enough." Marcus stared into the fire, thinking about Mary's last words, about the promise he'd made and broken so many times. Maybe it wasn't too late to keep it after all. "Tomorrow I ride to Billings," he said. "Send these letters to Tom Crawford. Set things in motion. And if it does not work, then we run. Keep running until we find somewhere safe." Jakob nodded approvingly. "Good plan. But Marcus, remember, sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. Maybe you do not need to run so far." "What do you mean?" "There are many places in Montana where a man can start over. Change his name, his story, become someone new. Especially if he has help from friends." Marcus looked at the older man with new respect. "You've done this before." "Yeah, I was not always Jakob Henriksen, trapper. Once I was something else, someone else, but that person died in the war, and I was born again here in these mountains." The idea was tempting, seductive even. To simply become someone else. To start fresh with Sarah and Grace in some distant valley where no one knew their story. But first, he had to make sure Theodore Ashford believed they were already dead. "Tomorrow," Marcus said again, more to himself. Then to Jakob, "Tomorrow we start building a new life." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. But inside, by the warm fire, three people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances began to plan for a future. None of them had dared imagine just days before. The hunter had become the protector, the prey had become family, and somewhere in the space between them, something beautiful was being born. The ride to Billings took Marcus through terrain he knew well, but everything felt different now. The familiar landmarks, Eagle's Peak, the twisted pine that marked the halfway point, the frozen creek where he'd once cornered a cattle rustler, all seemed to belong to someone else's life. 3 days ago, he'd been Marcus Brennan, bounty hunter. Now he wasn't sure who he was, but he knew who he wanted to become. Sheriff Tom Crawford was cleaning his rifle when Marcus knocked on his office door. The two men had known each other for nearly a decade, sharing an uneasy respect born of being on opposite sides of the law without being enemies. "Marcus Brennan," Tom said, not looking up from his work. "Heard you were tracking someone up in the high country. Word travels fast." "It does when Theodore Ashford sends telegrams to every sheriff between here and Denver, asking about a pregnant woman named Sarah Hartwell." Tom's eyes met Marcus's. "Funny thing is, Ashford claims she's a thief, but I did some checking. Seems she was his housekeeper, and the timing of her ... coincides with some interesting rumors about his character." Marcus felt a surge of relief. If Tom had already done his own investigation, this conversation would be easier than expected. "What kind of rumors?" Tom set down his rifle and leaned back in his chair. "The kind that makes a man wonder why Theodore Ashford wants a pregnant woman found so badly. The kind that make a sheriff ask questions about what really happened in that Denver mansion." "And what answers did you find?" "Enough to know that Sarah Hartwell isn't the criminal in this story. Tom studied Marcus's face. Question is, why are you here instead of collecting Ashford's bounty? Marcus pulled out the letter he'd written to Tom and set it on the desk. Because I need your help with something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Tom read the letter twice, his expression growing more serious with each word. When he finished, he looked up at Marcus with something approaching admiration. You want to fake her death. I want to save her life. And her daughter's daughter? Born 3 days ago in a blizzard. Nearly died, Marcus's voice softened. She's perfect, Tom. Innocent. Doesn't deserve to pay for her father's sins. Tom was quiet for a long moment, tapping his fingers on the desk. This is dangerous, Marcus. If Ashford finds out you're lying ... he won't. Not if we do this right. I need an official report from a sheriff, stating that the bodies of Sarah Hartwell and her unborn child were found in the wilderness, mauled by wolves. Unrecognizable but confirmed by personal effects. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're asking me to commit fraud, to lie in an official document. I'm asking you to protect an innocent woman and her baby from a man who would kill them both to protect his reputation. And what happens to you in all this? Ashford will still pay the bounty. Marcus had thought about this part carefully. I take the money, play the part of the successful bounty hunter. Then I disappear, change my name, start over somewhere far from here. With Sarah and the baby. It wasn't a question, but Marcus nodded anyway. If they'll have me. Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered main street of Billings. You know what you're asking me to risk. My badge, my reputation, maybe my life if this goes wrong? Yes. And you know what I'm going to say? Marcus waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. Tom turned back to him with a grin. I'm going to say it's about time you did something worthwhile with that gun of yours. They spent the next 2 hours crafting the false report, making it detailed. Enough to be believable, but vague enough to avoid scrutiny. Tom would backdate it to 3 days ago, claiming he'd investigated reports of wolves in the area and found evidence of an attack. Sarah's locket, the one Marcus had learned about at the trading post, would serve as proof of identity. I'll need the locket, Tom said. She might not want to give it up. It was her mother's. Then we'll have to convince her. This won't work without physical evidence. As they finalized the plan, Tom asked the question Marcus had been dreading. What if Ashford sends someone to verify the story? Another bounty hunter, maybe someone who knows these mountains. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. But hopefully, he'll be satisfied with the report and the recovered jewelry. Men like Ashford don't usually want to dwell on their ... mistakes. Marcus left Billings with Tom's promise to send the false report within the week. But he also carried a new weight on his shoulders, the knowledge that several lives now depended on a deception that could unravel at any moment. The ride back to Jakob's cabin gave him too much time to think. What if Sarah didn't want to disappear with him? What if she preferred to take her chances alone rather than trust a man who'd been hired to kill her? The possibility made his chest tight with something he didn't want to examine too closely. He found the cabin in chaos when he arrived. Jakob was pacing the floor, his usually calm demeanor shattered, while sounds of distress came from the bedroom. What's wrong? Marcus demanded. The baby, Jakob said. She has a fever. Will not eat. Sarah, she is. He gestured helplessly toward the bedroom. Marcus pushed through the door to find Sarah sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face as she held Grace against her chest. The baby's skin was flushed and hot, and her breathing was rapid and shallow. She was fine this morning, Sarah sobbed. But then she started crying, and she won't stop, and she's so hot. Marcus knelt beside the bed, gently touching Grace's forehead. The baby was burning with fever, and her cry was weak and reedy. He'd seen enough sick animals to know this was serious. How long has she been like this? Since you left? It started Slowly, but it's getting worse. Marcus felt panic clawing at his throat. He knew nothing about sick babies, and the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away in good weather. With the snow still falling intermittently, it might as well be on the moon. "Jakob," he called, "do you have any medical supplies? Anything for a fever? Some willow bark. Emma used it for headaches. Bring it, and hot water, clean cloths." Marcus had no idea if willow bark would help a newborn, but he had to try something. As Jakob busied himself with preparations, Marcus sat beside Sarah, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "She's going to be fine," he said, as much to convince himself as Sarah. "You don't know that. Babies die, Marcus. They die from fevers, from the cold, from things their mothers can't protect them from." Sarah's voice broke. "I brought her into this world just to watch her leave it." "No," Marcus's voice was firm. "No, that's not going to happen. Grace is strong. She survived being born in a blizzard. She survived this too." But as the hours passed, Grace's condition worsened. The willow bark tea, cooled and given to her drop by drop, seemed to have no effect. Her fever climbed higher, and her cries grew weaker. Marcus found himself praying to a God he hadn't spoken to since Mary died, bargaining with the universe for the life of a 3-day-old baby he'd somehow come to love. "There's a crow medicine woman," Jakob said quietly as the 3 adults kept vigil through the night, 2 hours south. "She knows things doctors do not, in this weather." Marcus looked toward the window where snow was falling again. "Is better than watching the baby die." Sarah looked up from where she was trying to get Grace to nurse. "Will she help white people?" "Yellow Bird helped Emma when doctors could not. She will help if we ask properly. It was their only option." As dawn broke gray and cold, Marcus prepared for another desperate ride through the wilderness. But this time, he wasn't hunting prey. He was racing death itself. Sarah insisted on coming, despite her weakness. "I won't be separated from her, not now." They made the journey on horseback, Marcus holding Sarah while she clutched Grace to her chest. The baby's fever had spiked during the night, and she was barely conscious, her tiny body limp and burning, yellow. Bird's Camp was a collection of traditional lodges nestled in a protected valley. The medicine woman herself was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of decades of wisdom and hardship. She took one look at Grace and gestured for them to follow her into her lodge. What followed was like nothing Marcus had ever witnessed. Yellow Bird worked with plants and roots he couldn't identify, chanting in her native language while preparing poultices and teas. She bathed Grace in water infused with herbs, then wrapped her in soft doeskin treated with more mysterious preparations. "The fever comes from bad spirits," she explained in careful English. "Must draw them out, replace them with good medicine." Marcus wanted to scoff at the talk of spirits, but he held his tongue. Modern medicine had failed them. If ancient wisdom could save Grace, he'd believe in anything. The treatment took hours. Yellow Bird worked with patient concentration, periodically checking Grace's breathing and pulse. Slowly, gradually, the baby's fever began to break. Her color improved, her breathing steadied, and finally, miraculously, she opened her eyes and let out a strong, healthy cry. Sarah wept with relief, holding her daughter close while thanking Yellow Bird over and over. The medicine woman simply smiled and packed small bundles of herbs for them to take. "For the journey ahead," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "You have far to go, and much danger waits. But the little one is strong now. She will survive." Marcus wanted to ask how Yellow Bird knew about their journey, but some questions were better left unasked. He pressed coins into her weathered palm, which she accepted with dignity. The ride back to Jakob's cabin was like emerging from a nightmare into daylight. Grace nursed eagerly for the first time in 2 days, and Sarah's color returned as her strength rebuilt. But Marcus knew their respite was temporary. "We need to leave soon," he told Jakob that evening. "Tom's report will buy us time, but not much. Ashford will want confirmation, and when he doesn't get it, where will you go? Marcus had been thinking about that during the long hours of Grace's illness. West, California, maybe. Somewhere. We can disappear completely. And your bounty hunting days? Over. I'm done killing for money. Marcus looked toward the bedroom where Sarah was settling Grace for the night. I've got something more important to live for now. Jakob nodded approvingly. Good. Death is easy business, but life is hard work. Requires a better man. That night, as Marcus sat by the fire cleaning his guns, not to use them for murder, but to protect the family he'd chosen, he thought about the strange turns his life had taken. A week ago, he'd been a killer for hire. Now he was a protector, a potential father, a man with something to lose. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, moving quietly to avoid waking Grace. She sat beside him, close enough that he could smell the lavender. Soap Jakob had provided. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For saving us. Again. For riding through a blizzard to find help for Grace. For choosing us over the money. Marcus set down his rifle and turned to face her. Sarah, there's something I need you to understand. The life I'm offering you it won't be easy. We'll always have to be careful, always looking over our shoulders. And I'm not a good man. I've done things. Sarah reached out and touched his cheek, silencing him. You're the man who delivered my daughter in a snowstorm. Who gave up everything to protect us. Who rode through another blizzard to save her life. That's the man I know. That's the man I... She didn't finish the sentence, but the words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. I love you too, Marcus said quietly, and felt something inside his chest that had been broken for years finally begin to heal. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, but inside Jakob's cabin, a new family was being born from the ashes of their old lives. Tomorrow they would begin their journey toward freedom, but tonight they had each other, and Grace was safe and well. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The telegram arrived at Jakob's cabin on a Tuesday morning, carried by a young rider whose hand shook as he delivered it. Marcus read the message twice before the words fully sank in. Report confirmed. Payment processed. Additional work available if interested. T. Ashford. Theodore Ashford believed Sarah and Grace were dead. The deception had worked, but instead of relief, Marcus felt only a hollow dread. Additional work meant Ashford had other problems that needed solving, other people who threatened his carefully constructed world. Marcus folded the telegram and tossed it into the fire, watching as his old life turned to ash. Good news? Sarah asked, bouncing Grace gently in her arms. The baby had fully recovered from her fever and was thriving, her dark eyes bright and alert. The best. Ashford thinks we're dead. We're free. Sarah's smile faltered. Then why do you look like someone died? Marcus stared at the flames consuming the telegram. Because someone did. Marcus Brennan, bounty hunter, just ceased to exist. And I'm not sure who I am without him. You're the man who saved our lives. Your Grace's ... Sarah hesitated. What? I was going to say father, but I don't know if that's presumptuous. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Father. He'd never imagined himself in that role. But looking at Grace now, seeing how she turned toward his voice and grabbed his finger with surprising strength, he realized he wanted nothing more. Not presumptuous, he said quietly. Terrifying maybe, but not presumptuous. They left Jakob's cabin 3 days later, heading west toward the distant promise of California. The Norwegian trapper had outfitted them with supplies and a sturdy wagon, claiming he had no use for either anymore. His farewell gift to Grace was a small wooden rattle he'd carved himself, painted with delicate flowers that reminded Marcus of Emma's garden. You take care of each other, Jakob said, embracing Marcus with surprising emotion. And remember, the past is buried. Only the future matters now. The journey west was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Instead of tracking prey across hostile terrain, he was protecting his family through a landscape full of wonder and discovery. Sarah proved to be an excellent traveling companion, skilled at making camp and caring for Grace while maintaining the kind of optimism that had carried her through pregnancy and childbirth alone. They traveled slowly, partly because of Grace's needs and partly because they were in no hurry to reach anywhere in particular. Each night, they'd camp beside streams or in protected valleys, and Marcus would teach Sarah how to read the stars while she told him stories about her childhood in Ohio. "I always wanted to see the ocean," she said one evening as they camped in the foothills of the Rockies. "My father used to tell me stories about ships and whales in water that stretched to the horizon." "Then we'll see it together," Marcus promised. "All three of us." But their peaceful journey was shattered on the 10th day when Marcus spotted the dust cloud following them. 3 riders, maybe 4, maintaining a steady distance but definitely tracking them. His blood ran cold as he recognized the pattern. This was how he'd hunted people, staying far enough back to avoid detection while keeping his quarry in sight. "Sarah," he said, keeping his voice calm, "I need you to take Grace and hide in those rocks up ahead. Don't come out until I call for you." "What's wrong?" "We're being followed." Sarah's face went pale, but she didn't panic. She'd learned to trust Marcus's instincts completely. "How many?" "3 or 4. Could be bounty hunters, could be worse. What if they're not here for us?" Marcus checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. "Then they won't mind answering a few questions." He positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the trail, using his spyglass to get a better look at their pursuers. What he saw made his heart sink. The lead rider was Nathaniel Cross, one of the most ruthless bounty hunters in the territory. Cross was known for his persistence and his willingness to bend any rule to complete a contract. If he was here, it meant someone had paid him very well to find them. The second rider was younger, probably Cross's apprentice. The third was a surprise, a woman with short-cropped hair and hard eyes, wearing men's clothes and riding like she'd been born in the saddle. Marcus had heard stories about female bounty hunters, but had never encountered one. They were still a mile away when Marcus made his decision. He couldn't outrun them with Sarah and Grace, and he couldn't fight them all. But he might be able to convince them they were chasing ghosts. He rode down to meet them alone, leaving his rifle holstered but ready. Cross called out when he was 50 yards away. "Marcus Brennan. Didn't expect to see you out here, Nathaniel. What brings you to this part of the territory?" Cross rode closer, his pale eyes scanning the landscape behind Marcus. "Hunting the same prey you were after, seems like. Woman named Sarah Hartwell. Heard you found her already." "Found her dead," Marcus replied. "Wolves got to her and the baby. Nothing left but scraps and jewelry." "Funny thing about that," the woman rider spoke up, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Theodore Ashford got to thinking maybe the wolves were a little too convenient. Sent us to verify your story." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "And you are?" "Catherine Reeves. Some folks call me Cat." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I specialize in finding people who don't want to be found." "Well, Cat, you're welcome to look for scraps in the snow, but you won't find much. That storm 3 weeks back scattered everything." Cross studied Marcus's face. "You collected the full bounty. $500 for a woman and unborn child. That's a lot of money for wolf bait." "Ashford paid for the results. I delivered them." "See, that's what's bothering me," Cross continued. "You've always been thorough, Marcus. Brought back proof of every kill. But this time, all Ashford got was a sheriff's report and some jewelry. No body, no confirmation from anyone who actually saw the corpse." Marcus felt sweat gathering under his collar despite the cool mountain air. Sometimes that's all there is, Nathaniel. Nature doesn't always leave convenient evidence. Kat dismounted and began examining the ground around Marcus's horse. Interesting tracks here. Looks like a wagon passed through recently. Heavy wagon, carrying more than one person. Lots of people travel this road. Not many with a newborn. Baby, she said, pointing to marks in the dirt that Marcus couldn't even see. Those are the tracks of someone stopping to change diapers. And here, see this spot. That's where breast milk was spilled. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Cross was faster. The older bounty hunter had his rifle trained on Marcus before he could clear leather. Easy now, Marcus. No need for violence between professionals. Just tell us where they are, and we can work something out. I told you, you told us a story, Kat interrupted. A good story, well crafted, probably would have fooled most people. But you made one mistake. What's that? She smiled again. And this time there was genuine amusement in her expression. You care too much. Real bounty hunters don't ride around the wilderness for weeks after completing a job. They go collect their money and find the next contract. But you've been out here, protecting something, or someone. The third rider, the young apprentice, had been quiet until now. Maybe we're wrong, he said. Maybe he really did find them. Dead. Shut up, Billy, Cross snapped. Marcus here is going to tell us the truth, aren't you, Marcus? Because if you don't, we'll just keep looking. And when we find that woman and baby, and we will find them, things might go badly for everyone involved. Marcus weighed his options. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of clever lies. But he had one advantage: these three didn't know exactly where Sarah and Grace were hidden. If he could buy them time to escape. All right, he said, raising his hands in apparent surrender. You got me. They're alive. I knew it, Kat said triumphantly. Where? About 2 miles north of here. There's a cave system in the red rocks. Sarah's been hiding there with the baby. Cross looked suspicious. Why should we believe you now? Because you're right, I do care too much. I can't let anything happen to that baby. She's innocent in all this. How touching, Kat said dryly. Billy, you ride north and check out these caves. Nathaniel and I will keep Marcus company here. As Billy rode away, Marcus felt time slipping through his fingers like sand. Sarah would hear the hoofbeats and know something was wrong, but would she understand the danger quickly enough? Would she take Grace and run, or would she try to help him? You know, Marcus, Cross said conversationally, I always respected your work. Clean kills, honest reports, no unnecessary cruelty. But this business with the woman, it's not like you. People change. Not usually for the better in our line of work. Cross shifted in his saddle, keeping his rifle trained on Marcus. Tell me, what made her so special? Was it the money? Did she offer you more than Ashford? It wasn't about money. Kat laughed. Of course it was. It's always about money with people like us. No, Marcus said quietly. Sometimes it's about finding something worth protecting instead of destroying. The conversation was interrupted by gunshots from the north. 3 quick reports followed by silence. Cross and Kat exchanged glances. Billy's either found them or found trouble, Kat said. More shots echoed across the valley, and Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Had Sarah been forced to defend herself? Was Grace safe? Sounds like your woman's got some fight in her, Cross observed. Good. Ashford wants her alive if possible. Says he has questions. The words sent ice through Marcus's veins. If Ashford wanted Sarah alive, it meant he suspected she knew something that could damage him. And men like Theodore Ashford had ways of extracting information that made death seem like mercy. Let me go to them, Marcus said. I can talk her down, convince her to surrender peacefully. Nice try, Kat replied. But I think we'll handle this Her words were cut off by a rifle crack, and Kat jerked in her saddle, blood blooming across her shoulder. Cross spun toward the sound, giving Marcus the opening he needed. Marcus drew and fired in one smooth motion, his bullet taking cross-center mass. The older bounty hunter toppled from his horse, his rifle clattering on the rocks. "Sarah!" Marcus shouted. "Stay hidden." But she was already emerging from the rocks, Grace strapped to her chest in a makeshift carrier, a smoking rifle in her hands. Her face was pale but determined. "The young one?" Marcus asked. "He won't be bothering anyone anymore," Sarah said grimly. Cat was clutching her wounded shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers. "You're both dead," she gasped. "Ashford will send more. He'll never stop looking. Then we'll keep running," Marcus said. He turned to Sarah. "How did you?" "My father taught me to shoot. And I heard enough of your conversation to understand." "What was happening?" Sarah adjusted Grace's career. The young man tried to force his way into the rocks. "I had no choice." Marcus felt a surge of admiration mixed with worry. Sarah had killed to protect Grace, crossing a line she could never uncross. He knew how that felt, how it changed you. "We need to move," he said. Now others might have heard the shots. They gathered their supplies quickly, leaving Kat alive but disarmed. She would survive to report back to Ashford, but that couldn't be helped. Marcus considered finishing her, but he was trying to become a different man. And different men didn't kill wounded enemies. As they rode west, pushing their horses harder than was wise, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation with Cross. The bounty hunter had been right about one thing: Marcus had changed, but it wasn't for the worse. For the first time in his adult life, he was fighting for something instead of against it. "Where now?" Sarah asked, raising her voice over the sound of hoofbeats. "California," Marcus replied. "Far from Colorado as we can get. But first, we need to disappear completely. New names, new stories, new lives. And if they follow us there..." Marcus looked back at the dust cloud they were leaving, then at Sarah and Grace riding beside him. His family, his future, his reason to keep fighting. "Then we keep running until we find somewhere they can't follow. And if that doesn't work..." Double quotes, he patted the rifle at his side. "Then we make our stand." Behind them, the mountains of Montana grew smaller in the distance. Ahead lay the unknown territory of their new lives, full of danger, but also full of possibility. They were no longer predator and prey, hunter and hunted. They were something new entirely, a family forged in violence, but held together by love, riding toward a horizon that promised freedom if they were strong enough to claim it. The chase was far from over. But they were no longer running alone. The trading post at Devil's Canyon was little more than a collection of weathered buildings, huddled against the desert wind. But it represented something crucial, the last outpost before the lawless expanse of the Mojave Desert. Marcus pulled their wagon up to the hitching post as the sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "We'll rest here tonight," he said, helping Sarah down from the wagon seat. Grace had slept through most of the day's travel, lulled by the steady rhythm of the wheels. "Are we safe here?" Sarah asked, scanning the sparse collection of buildings. "Safe is relative. But the man who runs this place, Dutch Morrison, doesn't ask questions, and he doesn't answer them either. As long as we pay for what we need, we're just another family heading west." Inside the trading post, Dutch Morrison proved to be a grizzled man in his 60s, with intelligent eyes and calloused hands. He took their money for supplies and a room without comment, but Marcus caught him studying their faces with the kind of attention that came from years of reading people. "You folks heading to California?" Dutch asked as he counted their coins. "Eventually," Marcus replied carefully. "Might want to reconsider. Word is there's been trouble on the western trails. Bandits mostly, but also some kind of manhunt. Men with official papers asking about a family matching your description." Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him, but kept his own expression neutral. "What kind of men?" "The kind with money and authority. Federal marshals, they claimed, but they didn't feel right to me. Too well dressed, too concerned with one particular family instead of general law and order. When was this? 3 days ago. Rode through heading west, then came back this morning asking more questions. Seemed mighty interested in anyone with a newborn baby. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. If Ashford had federal marshals on his payroll or men posing as marshals, their situation had become exponentially more dangerous. Any advice? Marcus asked. The Dutch studied them for a long time. If I was a betting man, I'd say you folks aren't who you claim to be. And if I was a gambling man, I'd bet those marshals aren't either. My advice? There's more than one way to reach California. That night, in their small room above the trading post, Marcus and Sarah huddled over a map by candlelight while Grace slept peacefully in a makeshift crib. The main trail west goes through Carson City, Marcus said, tracing the route with his finger. But if these fake marshals are watching the established routes ... what other options do we have? Marcus pointed to a different path, one that curved south through desert country before turning north toward the California coast. There's an old Spanish trail that prospectors use sometimes. Dangerous, not much water, but also not much law. Enforcement. How dangerous? Bad enough that most sensible people avoid it, which means it might be perfect for us. Sarah leaned back against the rough wooden wall. 6 months ago, I was worried about keeping the fireplace clean and the laundry done. Now I'm planning routes through outlaw territory to avoid federal marshals who want me dead. Regrets? She looked at Grace, then at Marcus. Only that it took so long for our paths to cross. The next morning brought unexpected complications. As Marcus loaded their wagon, Dutch appeared with a grim expression in urgent news. Those marshals came back, he said quietly. Bring more men this time. 6 riders, armed to the teeth, asking very specific questions about a woman with dark hair, a man with a scar on his left hand, and a newborn girl. Marcus unconsciously flexed his left hand, where a knife fight 3 years ago had left a distinctive mark. Somehow Ashford's people had obtained detailed descriptions. How long ago? Hour, maybe less. They're checking every building in town, questioning everyone who was here yesterday. You need to leave, now. But as Marcus turned toward their wagon, he saw them 6 men in dark coats, methodically working their way down the street. They moved with military precision, and their leader wore the silver star of a federal marshal, though Marcus suspected it was as fake as their authority. Back door, he asked Dutch. Through the storeroom, your wagon? Leave it, we'll go on foot. They gathered only what they could carry: food, water, ammunition, and the small bag of gold coins that represented their entire fortune. Grace went into the carrier strapped to Sarah's chest, while Marcus shouldered their supplies. Dutch led them through the trading post storage areas to a rear exit that opened onto the desert. Follow the arroyos south for 2 miles, then head west toward those red rocks. There's an old mine shaft where you can hide until dark. Why are you helping us? Sarah asked. Dutch's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. Because I've got 2 granddaughters about Grace's age, and I know the difference between lawmen and hired killers. Those men outside, they're killers. The escape through the desert was a nightmare of heat, sand, and constant fear. Marcus led them through terrain that would challenge experienced outdoorsmen, while Sarah struggled to keep up despite her exhaustion. Grace, mercifully, seemed to thrive in the dry heat, sleeping peacefully against her mother's chest. They found the abandoned mine shaft just as Dutch had described, a narrow opening in the red sandstone that widened into a surprisingly large chamber. Previous travelers had left behind evidence of their passage: the remains of a fire pit, some rusty tools, and names carved into the stone walls. We'll wait here until nightfall, Marcus said, settling their packs in the coolest corner of the cave. Then we'll follow the old Spanish trail south. How far is it to California? 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're careful. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This trail, It's not just dangerous because of the terrain. There are men out there who shoot first and ask questions later. Prospectors protecting their claims, outlaws running from the law, Indians who don't take kindly to trespassers. Sarah adjusted Grace's blanket, her movements tired but determined. And you think we can make it through all that? I think we don't have a choice. Ashford's not going to give up, and those fake marshals prove he's got resources we can't match in a straight fight. Our only advantage is going where they won't expect us to go. As afternoon faded into evening, they prepared for the next phase of their journey. Marcus cleaned and checked their weapons, while Sarah organized their meager supplies. Grace had begun to show her personality more clearly. She was alert during the day, watching everything with bright, curious eyes, but she slept peacefully at night. She's going to be a strong woman, Marcus observed, watching Grace grip his finger with tiny hands. She have to be, Sarah replied. The world doesn't make things easy for women like us. What do you mean, women who fight back? Women who refuse to accept what powerful men try to do to them. She need to be stronger than both of us combined. As darkness fell, they emerged from the mine shaft into a desert transformed by moonlight. The harsh landscape of day became something ethereal and beautiful, with silver sand stretching toward distant mountains. But beauty couldn't hide the dangers ahead. They walked through the night, following game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the main routes where their pursuers might be waiting. Marcus had traveled this country before, but never with a woman and infant, never while being hunted by men with unlimited resources. Dawn found them sheltering in a grove of Joshua trees, sharing water and dried meat while Grace nursed hungrily. The landscape around them was alien twisted plants and sun-baked earth that looked like the surface of another planet. How do people live out here? Sarah asked, staring at the barren vista. Carefully, and not for very long if they make mistakes. Their second day in the desert brought new challenges. The heat was brutal, forcing them to travel only during the coolest hours before dawn and after sunset. Water became their primary concern. Every drop had to be conserved. Every source carefully evaluated. That they encountered their first other travelers on the third day. 4 prospectors heading east, their pack mules loaded with what Marcus hoped was legitimate mining equipment rather than stolen goods. The men were friendly enough, sharing information about water sources ahead and warning about a recent Apache raid near Bitter Springs. You folks are brave, traveling with a baby, the oldest prospector said. This ain't country for families. Sometimes families don't get to choose their country, Sarah replied. That evening, as they made camp in the shelter of a rock formation, Marcus realized they were being followed again. Not by the fake marshals. This was someone else, someone who moved with the skill of an Apache scout or an experienced tracker. We're not alone, he told Sarah quietly. How many? 1, maybe 2, been shadowing us since this morning. What do they want? Could be anything. Robbery, information, or they might just be curious about travelers in their territory. The answer came at dawn when Marcus woke to find a young Apache warrior sitting by their cold fire pit, apparently waiting for them to wake up. He was perhaps 20 years old, with intelligent eyes and traditional clothing that showed no sign of recent contact with white settlements. Marcus reached slowly for his rifle, but the Apache held up a hand in a peaceful gesture. I speak English, the young man said. Learned from missionaries before they were asked to leave. What do you want? Marcus asked, keeping his voice neutral. To warn you. Men with badges came to our village yesterday, asking about a woman, baby, man with a scarred hand. Offer money for information. Marcus felt his blood run cold. If Ashford's people were enlisting Apache help, their situation had become almost impossible. What did your people tell them? Nothing. We do not help men who smell of lies. But they offered a lot of money. Others might be less careful about truth. The Apache warrior studied Grace, who was awake and watching him with bright eyes. This child, she's not born of violence? Sarah spoke for the first time. She was born of love, and she's loved now. The warrior nodded approvingly. Good. Children should know love before they know fear. He stood gracefully. I am called Running Wolf. My grandmother is a medicine woman. She says the baby has a strong spirit, will live a long life if she survives these first trials. How does your grandmother know about grace? Running Wolf smiled. Grandmother knows many things. She also says to tell you follow water to the place where earth bleeds. There you will find a passage to the great water. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Running Wolf had melted back into the desert landscape as silently as he'd appeared. Where earth bleeds? Sarah asked. Marcus thought about it, remembering stories he'd heard from other travelers. There's a place called Red Canyon, about 50 miles southwest. Iron deposits in the rock make it look like the cliffs are bleeding. If there's water there, it could take us to the coast. It's possible, but it's also deep in Apache territory, and if Ashford's people are offering bounties. Sarah looked down at Grace, then back at Marcus. We can't keep running forever. At some point, we have to take a stand or find a way to end this. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop being prey and start being predators. Theodore Ashford destroyed my life, forced me to run, and now he's trying to murder our daughter. Maybe it's time he faced some consequences. Marcus stared at her, seeing something new in her eyes, not just determination, but a cold anger that reminded him of his own transformation from victim to hunter years ago. You're talking about going back, fighting him directly. I'm talking about survival. Real survival, not just staying one step ahead of his killers until we make a mistake. Sarah's voice hardened. He has secrets, Marcus. Dark secrets that could destroy him if they came to light. Maybe it's time someone used those secrets against him. As they prepared to break camp and continue their journey toward Red Canyon, Marcus found himself considering Sarah's words. They'd been reactive since leaving Colorado, always responding to Ashford's moves. But what if they went on the offensive? What if they became the hunters instead of the hunted? It was a dangerous idea, one that could get them all killed. But it was also the only plan that offered a real chance at freedom instead of a lifetime of running. The desert stretched endlessly ahead of them, holding both dangers and possibilities. Somewhere in that vast wilderness lay the path to their future, whether it led to safety in California or back to a final confrontation with Theodore. Ashford remained to be seen. But for the first time since leaving Jacob's cabin, Marcus felt like they were moving towards something instead of just running away. And that made all the difference in the world. Red Canyon revealed itself at sunset like a wound in the earth, its iron-stained cliffs glowing crimson in the dying light. Water trickled down the rock faces, creating small pools that reflected the sky like mirrors. After days in the desert, the sound of running water was more beautiful than any symphony. Running Wolf was right, Sarah said, adjusting Grace's position in her carrier. This place does look like the earth is bleeding. Marcus studied the canyon entrance, noting the narrow passages that could easily become traps if they were followed. But the water here was sweet and plentiful, and there were caves that could provide shelter. More importantly, he could see ancient petroglyphs on the wall, signs that this place had been sacred to indigenous peoples for generations. That might offer them some protection. They made camp in a hidden alcove 50 feet above the canyon floor, accessible only by a treacherous path that would be difficult to follow in the dark. As Sarah settled Grace for the evening, Marcus climbed higher to scout their surroundings. What he saw made his heart sink. In the distance, barely visible in the fading light, a line of dust marked the passage of riders. Their pursuers had found their trail. How many? Sarah asked when he returned to their camp. 8, maybe 10. They're moving carefully, but they know we're here. Sarah was quiet for a moment, gently rocking Grace. Marcus, I've been thinking about what I said earlier. About using Theodore's secrets against him. What kind of secrets? When I worked in his house, I saw things. Letters, documents, meetings with men who shouldn't have been there. Theodore Ashford isn't just a successful businessman. He's involved with territorial politics, land deals that displaced entire families, mining claims that were obtained through questionable means. Marcus felt a spark of interest. You're talking about corruption. I'm talking about enough evidence to destroy him completely. But it's all back in Denver, hidden in his house. I know where he keeps his private papers, the ones even his business partners don't know about. That's 1,000 miles away, Sarah, and going back there would be suicide. Not if we had help. Not if we had allies who wanted to see Theodore Ashford fall as much as we do. Before Marcus could respond, a sound echoed up from the canyon below, the clip-clop of horses on stone, moving slowly but steadily closer. Their conversation would have to wait. "Stay here with Grace," Marcus whispered. "I'm going to see how close they've gotten." He made his way down the treacherous path, using shadows and rock formations for cover. The moon was rising, casting everything in silver light that made concealment both easier and more difficult. The riders had stopped at the canyon entrance, and Marcus could hear voices carried on the night air. One voice made his blood freeze. Catherine Reeves, the female bounty hunter who'd survived their encounter in Montana. "Trail goes into the canyon," she was saying. "But this is Apache country. Could be a trap. Ashford's paying us enough to take the risk," another voice replied. "Besides, how dangerous can one man, a woman, and a baby be?" "Don't underestimate them," Kat warned. "Marcus Brennan isn't just any bounty hunter. He's smart, experienced, and he's got nothing to lose now. That makes him more dangerous than a cornered rattlesnake." Marcus counted the figures below 9. Riders, all armed, all looking like men who killed for money. But they were bunched together at the canyon mouth, uncertain about proceeding in the dark. That gave him an idea. He worked his way higher, following a ledge that ran along the canyon wall. About 100 feet above the riders, he found what he was looking for, a pile of loose rocks held in place by nothing more than gravity and time. The avalanche he triggered was small by geological standards, but devastating for the men below. Tons of sandstone crashed down into the canyon entrance, creating a thunderous roar that echoed off the walls. When the dust settled, the passage was completely blocked. Shouts and curses rose from the other side of the rockfall. Marcus heard Kat's voice, furious but unharmed. "Find another way in. There has to be another trail." But Marcus knew this canyon. He'd used it as a hideout years ago when he was first starting as a bounty hunter. There was only one way in or out, and he'd just sealed it. Their pursuers would have to ride 20 miles around the mesa to find another approach, buying precious time. When he returned to camp, Sarah was pacing nervously with Grace. "What happened?" "It sounded like the world was ending. Bought us some time, but we need to use it wisely." Marcus began gathering their supplies. "You mentioned allies who might want to see Ashford fall. Tell me more." Sarah's eyes lit up with something that might have been hope. "Judge Harrison Caldwell. He's been investigating territorial corruption for months, but he doesn't have enough evidence to move against the biggest players. Theodore's one of his primary suspects. How do you know this?" "Because Judge Caldwell's wife was Theodore's housekeeper before me. She died under ... suspicious circumstances. The judge has been looking for proof ever since." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. "You think Caldwell would help us get to Ashford's papers?" "I think Judge Caldwell would move heaven and earth to see Theodore Ashford in prison. Or dead." The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious to the point of madness. Instead of continuing to California, they would circle back toward Denver, avoiding the main routes and using their knowledge of the territory to stay ahead of their pursuers. Once there, they would contact Judge Caldwell and offer him a deal protection for Sarah and Grace in exchange for helping them expose Ashford's crimes. It's incredibly dangerous, Marcus warned. We'd be walking back into the heart of enemy territory. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the safest, Sarah replied. Theodore will expect us to run as far and fast as possible. He won't expect us to come home. They left Red Canyon before dawn, climbing out through a hidden path that Marcus remembered from his earlier visit. The route took them up onto the mesa, where they could see for miles in every direction. Kat and her men were indeed circling around, but they were still hours away from finding an alternate route into the canyon. The journey back toward Colorado took them through some of the most remote country in the American West. They traveled by night when possible, hiding during the day in caves, abandoned buildings, or natural shelters. Grace adapted remarkably well to their nomadic existence, as if she understood that silence and stillness were matters of survival. On their fifth day, they encountered a group of travelers that changed everything. It was a family: mother, father, 3 children fleeing in the opposite direction with everything they owned loaded into 2 wagons. Soldiers burned us out, the father explained when Marcus approached their camp. Said we were squatting on federal land, but we had papers. Bought that homestead fair and square from the territorial office. Which soldiers? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. Didn't wear regular uniforms, private militia maybe. But they had official papers, signed by some judge in Denver. Sarah stepped closer. What judge? Man named Ashford. Theodore Ashford. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. Ashford wasn't just a corrupt businessman, he was actively involved in land seizures, using fake legal documents to steal property from legitimate settlers. Where were you headed? The father asked. California. Marcus lied smoothly. Looking for a fresh start. Well, you're heading into trouble if you go through Colorado territory. That Ashford fellow, he's got the law in his pocket. Honest folks don't stand a chance. After the family moved on, Marcus and Sarah sat by their small fire, digesting this new information. He's not just stealing from individuals, Sarah said. He's stealing from families, from children. How many people has he destroyed? Enough to make a lot of enemies, Marcus replied. Which means we might have more allies than we thought. They reached the Colorado border 2 weeks later, having successfully evaded their pursuers through a combination of skill, luck, and the kind of desperate cunning that comes from protecting what you love most. Grace had thrived during the journey, growing noticeably larger and more alert. She's beautiful, Sarah said, watching their daughter sleep peacefully despite their precarious circumstances. Sometimes I can't believe she's really ours. She's ours, Marcus said firmly. Whatever happens next, she's ours. Their first contact with Judge Caldwell came through an intermediary, a Methodist minister named Reverend William Hayes, who ran a small church in the foothills outside Denver. Hayes had been secretly documenting Ashford's crimes for months, gathering testimony from displaced families and maintaining correspondence with Judge Caldwell. The judge has been waiting for someone like you, Hayes told them as they met in his church basement. Someone with inside knowledge of Ashford's operations. What kind of protection can he offer? Marcus asked. Federal marshals. Real ones this time. And if your evidence is as damaging as you claim, witness protection until Ashford can be brought to trial. Sarah leaned forward. And if the evidence isn't enough? Hayes's expression grew grim. Then God help us all, because Theodore Ashford will own this entire territory within 5 years. The meeting with Judge Caldwell was arranged for the following evening, in a secure location outside the city. But as Marcus prepared for what might be their last chance at freedom, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. What if this is all a setup? He asked Sarah as they prepared to leave Grace with Reverend Hayes's wife. What if Caldwell is working with Ashford? Then we'll fight our way out, Sarah replied with a calm that surprised him. But Marcus, we can't live like this forever. Grace deserves better than a life spent running from shadows. She was right, of course. They'd reached the point where taking the stand was less dangerous than continuing to run. Either they would find justice through the legal system, or they would create their own justice through more direct means. As they rode toward their meeting with Judge Caldwell, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a killer for hire, tracking a pregnant woman through the wilderness for money. Now he was risking everything to protect that same woman and the daughter he'd helped bring into the world. "No regrets?" he asked Sarah. "About you? About Grace?" "Never." She paused. "About the people we've had to kill to protect her?" "Sometimes, but not enough to change anything." The meeting location was an abandoned mining office 15 miles northeast of Denver, isolated enough to prevent eavesdropping, but close enough to the city for Judge Caldwell to reach easily. As they approached the building, Marcus noticed fresh horse tracks in the dirt. Their contact was already there. Judge Harrison. Caldwell proved to be a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their story without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a leather-bound journal. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said when they finished, "the evidence you describe could indeed destroy Theodore Ashford. But retrieving it will require getting into his house, past his security, and into his private study. That's not just dangerous, it's nearly impossible." "Nearly," Sarah repeated, "but not completely." Caldwell smiled for the first time since they'd begun talking. "You have a plan. I have knowledge. I know his routines, his security arrangements, his private habits. More importantly, I know how to get in and out without being detected. And you're willing to take that risk?" Sarah looked at Marcus, then back at the judge. "We're willing to do whatever it takes to give our daughter a future free from Theodore Ashford's shadow." Judge Caldwell closed his journal and leaned back in his chair. "Then let's discuss how we're going to bring down the most powerful man in Colorado territory." Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, promising rain before morning. But inside the abandoned office, 3 people were planning something that might finally bring justice to a man who thought himself above the law. The hunter had become the protector, the victim had become the prosecutor, and now they were about to become something even more dangerous, people with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The final confrontation with Theodore Ashford was still ahead of them. But for the first time since leaving Jacob's cabin, Marcus felt like they actually had a chance of winning. The Ashford mansion loomed against the Denver skyline like a monument to stolen wealth, its Gothic towers and elaborate stonework paid for with the suffering of countless families. Sarah stood in the shadows across the street, studying the house where she'd once scrubbed floors and endured Theodore's advances, now planning its owner's downfall. 3 guards patrol the grounds, she whispered to Marcus. 2 more at the front entrance. But there's a servant's entrance in the back that's only locked, not guarded. And Ashford? Tuesday nights he meets with his political associates in the study. They'll be drunk on expensive whiskey and their own power by 10 o'clock. Judge Caldwell's federal marshals were positioned throughout the district, ready to move. The moment Sarah emerged with the evidence, everything depended on her ability to navigate the house unseen and crack the safe in Ashford's private study. "I should go with you," Marcus said. "No, you'll be recognized. Besides, someone needs to watch Grace." Sarah kissed their daughter's forehead, then handed her to Marcus. "If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. If something goes wrong," she continued firmly, "take Grace and run. Don't try to rescue me. Promise me." Marcus wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. Sarah had found her strength in these past months, evolving from victim to warrior. This was her fight now. "I promise," he lied. At 10:30, Sarah slipped through the servant's entrance using a key she'd kept from her employment. The familiar halls felt alien now, like visiting a place from a nightmare. She could hear voices and laughter from the study Ashford and his cronies dividing up Colorado territory like a pie. The private study was on the second floor, behind a door that appeared to be solid oak, but concealed a steel core. Sarah had watched Ashford open the hidden safe countless times, memorizing the combination through fearful observation. Inside the safe, she found exactly what Judge Caldwell needed: land deeds obtained through fraud, correspondence with corrupt officials, detailed records of bribes and intimidation. But at the bottom of the safe, wrapped in oiled cloth, was something that made her blood run cold. Documents bearing her own name. Medical records, certificates of death for both her and Grace, already signed and dated. Ashford had been planning their murders from the moment she'd fled, intending to erase them from existence completely. Touching, isn't it? Sarah spun around to find Theodore Ashford standing in the doorway, no longer the drunken politician, but a cold, calculating predator. Behind him stood Catherine Reeves, her arm still in a sling from their encounter in Montana, but her gun hand perfectly steady. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice someone prowling around my house?" Ashford stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Cat here has been watching for weeks, waiting for you to make exactly this mistake. The evidence will disappear, along with you and your bastard child. Though I must say, I'm impressed you made it this far. Most of my problems solve themselves much more quickly." Cat moved closer, her pistol trained on Sarah's chest. "Where's Marcus Brennan?" "Far from here." Wrong answer. Cat cocked her weapon. "He's outside somewhere, probably with the baby. Don't worry, we'll find them after we finish with you." But as the words left Cat's mouth, the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Sarah heard Marcus's voice, calm and deadly. "I don't think so." Gunfire erupted in the blackened room. Sarah dropped to the floor behind Ashford's massive desk as muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. She heard Cat cry out, then the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. When the shooting stopped, Marcus struck a match. Ashford was cowering in the corner, unharmed but terrified. Cat lay motionless near the door. Her bounty hunting days finally ended. "The evidence?" Marcus asked. Sarah held up the bundle of documents. "Everything we need. Plus proof that he planned to murder us all along." Ashford struggled to his feet, his political composure cracking completely. "You don't understand what you're doing. I have connections, influence. I can make you rich beyond your dreams." "We don't want your money," Sarah said. "We want our freedom." "Freedom?" Ashford laughed bitterly. "There's no freedom for people like you. There's only power in those who serve it. You'll never be safe from me, never be free." Marcus stepped closer, his gun still drawn. "You know, Theodore, I used to kill men for money, thought that made me powerful. But real power isn't taking life, it's protecting it." The sound of boots on the stairs announced the arrival of Judge Caldwell's marshals. Within minutes, Theodore Ashford was in shackles, his empire of corruption crumbling around him. "The evidence is solid," Judge Caldwell announced after reviewing the documents: fraud, bribery, conspiracy, attempted murder. "Theodore Ashford will spend the rest of his life in prison." "And the families he displaced?" Sarah asked. "Will have their lands returned and receive compensation from Ashford's seized assets." "Justice may be slow, Mrs. Brennan, but it does eventually arrive, Mrs. Brennan." Sarah smiled at the title. She and Marcus had been married by Reverend Hayes 3 days earlier, making their family official in the eyes of both God and the law. 6 months later, they stood on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching Grace take her first unsteady steps through the California sand. They'd bought a small ranch with money from the territorial government's reward for exposing the corruption ring. Far enough from civilization to ensure privacy, but close enough to a town for supplies and community. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked. Echoing Marcus's question from so many months ago. Marcus watched Grace giggle as waves washed over her bare feet, then looked at Sarah, his wife, his partner, his salvation. Only that it took a bounty contract to bring us together. Maybe that's what it was always meant to be, Sarah said. Not a contract for death, but for life. They'd built something beautiful from the wreckage of their old lives, a family forged in violence but sustained by love, a future carved from the wilderness of their past. Grace would grow up knowing she was wanted, protected, cherished. She would never know the fear that had shaped her first months of life. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of hope, Marcus Brennan, former bounty hunter, reluctant father, unlikely hero, held his family close and knew he'd finally found what he'd been hunting all along. Not prey, not profit, not redemption. Home. The man who'd been sent to deliver death had instead discovered life. And in saving Sarah and Grace, he had ultimately saved himself. Sometimes the greatest rewards come not from completing the mission, but from having the courage to abandon it entirely. In the distance, Grace's laughter mixed with the sound of the waves, and Marcus smiled. Their long hunt was finally over. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.